Thank you very much, Pam. So, very good morning and namaste to every one of you. This wonderful ancient Sanskrit greeting. And if you haven't come across it yet, namaste means I honor the place in you where the whole universe dwells. I honor the place in you which is of love and light, peace and truth. And when you are in that place in you, and I am in that place in me, we are one. So the investigation into the mystery of life within the illusion of physical reality is very well expressed by Albert Einstein when he once said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all sciences. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who cannot longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." Lifting the veil and investigating the mysteries of life is the aim of every true philosophy and science. It is the evolution of mind and matter within the illusion of physical reality, the discovery of the essential oneness of all life, and to make the dream of true brotherhood possible through selfless service for the benefit of all. As the Mahatma Kutumi tells us in letter 5, the term universal brotherhood is no idle phrase. Humanity in the mass has a paramount claim upon us. It is the only secure foundation for universal morality. If it be a dream, it is at least a noble one for mankind, and it is the aspiration of the true adept. The famous Indian poet and philosopher Rabindranath Tagore once said, "I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy." In 1913, he was honored with the Nobel Prize in Literature, the first for an Asian poet. The Nobel Prize was presented for lasting literary merit and for evidence of consistent idealism, which is the pursuit of perfection. His collection of poetry, the Gitanjali, and its universal message of harmony, were also the focus of an event at the UN headquarters in New York at that time, promoting mutual respect and cross-cultural understanding. The term Gitanjali literally means song offering in the Bengali language. Tagore was also very respected by the giants of Western science, some of whom met him personally, like Albert Einstein and Werner Heisenberg, for example, who felt quite overwhelmed by the recognition of relativity in the transcendental world, its interconnectedness, and most of all its impermanence as fundamental aspects of physical reality in the atomic and subatomic world. And he said that after these conversations with Tagore, some of these ideas that had seemed so crazy suddenly made much more sense. That was a great help for me. In the Mahatma letters, the Mahatma Kutumi makes a very powerful statement about what happens when the perennial timeless wisdom of the occult sciences about this impermanence or illusion of the manifested world is ignored by mankind. And he wrote, "If for generations we have shut out the world from the knowledge of our knowledge, it is on account of its absolute unfitness. And if, notwithstanding proofs given, it still refuses yielding to evidence, then will we at the end of this cycle retire into solitude and our kingdom of silence once more. We have offered to exhume the primeval strata of man's being, its basic nature, and lay bare the wonderful complications of his inner self, something never to be achieved by physiology or psychology in its ultimate expression, and demonstrate it scientifically. It matters not to them, the men of the world, if the excavations be so deep, the rock so rough and sharp, that in diving into that fathomless ocean, most of us perish in the dangerous exploration. For it is we who were the divers and the pioneers, and the men of science have just to reap where we have sown. It is our mission to plunge and bring the pearls of truth to the surface. Theirs, the scientists, to clean and set them into scientific jewels. And if they refuse to touch the ill-shapen oyster shell, insisting that there is not nor cannot be any precious pearl inside, then shall we once more wash our hands of any responsibility before humankind. For countless generations has the adept builded a fane of imperishable rocks, a giant's tower of infinite thought where the Titan, or the absolute or universal principle, dwelt, and will yet, if need be, dwell alone, emerging from it but at the end of every cycle, to invite the elect of mankind to cooperate with him and help in his turn enlighten superstitious men. And we will go on in that periodical work of ours. We will not allow ourselves to be baffled in our philanthropic attempts until that day when the foundations of a new continent of thought are so firmly built that no amount of opposition and ignorant malice will be found to prevail. In an article called The Babel of Modern Thought, published in the Theosophical magazine Lucifer in January 1891, Madame Blavatsky said, "Deny if you can that the most important of our present sciences were known to the ancients. Are not physics and natural sciences but an amplified reproduction of the works of Anaxagoras, of Empedocles, Democritus, and others? All that is taught now was taught by these philosophers then, for they maintained, even in the fragments of their works still extant, that the universe is composed of eternal atoms, which, moved by a subtle fire, combine in millions of various waves. With them, this fire was a divine breath of the universal mind. Furthermore, they taught there was neither life nor death, but only a constant destruction of form produced by perpetual physical transformation." Madame Blavatsky made two very important predictions. One in the Key to Theosophy, that during the last quarter of every 100 years an attempt is made by the masters of wisdom to help with the spiritual progress of humanity. Someone or more persons will appear in the world as their agents, and that a greater or less amount of occult knowledge and teaching will be given out. A second and a very precise one can be found in the Secret Doctrine, where she says that we are at the close of the Aryan Kali Yuga, a Sanskrit term describing the last of the 4 yugas in the ancient Puranas, a collection of symbolical and allegorical writings. Kali means strife, discord, quarrel or contention, symbolizing the Dark Age. She predicts that a large rent will be made in the veil of nature, and that materialistic science would receive a death blow by 1897. Quite a statement, but was she right? There's every indication that she was. A spark from the ancient occult wisdom has long since penetrated the scientific community, starting exactly at the date she predicted, a development already anticipated in the famous letter by the Mahachohan, containing valuable instructions passed on to some of the principal workers at the very early stage of the development of the Theosophical movement in India. It says right on the first page that the doctrine we promulgate, being the only true one, must, supported by such evidence as we are preparing to give, become ultimately triumphant, like every other truth. Yet it is absolutely necessary to inculcate it gradually, enforcing its theories, unimpeachable facts for those who know, with direct inference, deduced from and corroborated by the evidence furnished by modern exact science. And in Mahatma Letter 65, the Mahatma Kutumi confirms that science will be our best ally. Exactly in that year, 1897, which HPB predicted, the English physicist Joseph J. Thomson discovered the first subatomic particle, the electron. And out went the theory of an atom as being an indivisible solid building block of matter. For some time it was thought that an atom was a bit like a plum pudding, in which electrons were loosely connected. But only a few years later, Ernest Rutherford discovered that it had a nucleus, consisting of protons. The neutrons were discovered some years later by his student James Chadwick. It was this nucleus around which the electrons circled, and that most of the volume of an atom was empty space. But that was not the end of it either. In 1964, the American physicist and Nobel Prize laureate Murray Gell-Mann discovered that the particles of the nucleus consist of still smaller particles, called quarks now. And today it is believed that these particles only look like particles, but that they might be tiny vibrating filaments of energy. For example, in physics, a photon is a bundle of electromagnetic energy. In 1900, Max Planck, Nobel Prize laureate and one of the fathers of quantum physics, made the assumption that energy was made up of individual units or quanta. And in 1905, Albert Einstein theorized that not only the energy, but the radiation itself was quantized in the same manner which he called photons. A photon is not thought to be made out of smaller particles and is therefore a basic unit of nature, called an elementary particle. Brian Greene, professor of physics at Columbia University in New York, writes in his book, The Elegant Universe, that every particle is surrounded by an electric field, a so-called cloud of electric essence, and the force each particle feels arises through the interaction of their respective force fields by way of literally shooting quanta of light or photons at each other. That a quanta of light is not so much a transmitter of a force per se, but rather the transmitter of a message, of how the recipient must respond to the force in question. And for this reason, the photon is sometimes referred to as a messenger particle for the electromagnetic force, of which it is the smallest individualized packet. The secret doctrine also tells us that the light of the Logos is the link between objective matter and subjective thought. It is forward, the dynamic energy of cosmic ideation, says the poem, the one instrument with which the Logos works. Albert Einstein said already at the beginning of the 20th century, when he formulated his general theory of relativity, that space and time are intertwined, that matter is inseparable from an ever-present quantum energy field, underlying all appearances, which he expressed with his famous words, "We may therefore regard matter as being constituted by the regions of space in which the field is extremely intense. There is no place in this new kind of physics for the field and matter, for the field is the only reality." And about our perception of reality from the manifestations in this underlying energy field, he says that this reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. This awareness has haunted the scientific community for over a century, when it became obvious that matter is not at all what it seems to be, and nor is time. In ancient Hindu philosophy, this power of illusion, which makes phenomenal existence and its perception by finite minds possible, is called Maya, as we know, because it is subject to change through decay and differentiation, and which therefore has a beginning and an end. Only that which is changeless and eternal is called Parabrahm in Sanskrit, the secondless or absolute reality, an impersonal principle beyond human speculation. Maya or illusion is an element which enters into all finite things, says the secret doctrine. For everything that exists has only a relative, not an absolute reality. Nothing is permanent except the one hidden absolute existence, which contains in itself the noumena of all realities. The existences belonging to every plane of being up to the highest Dianchuans or highest intelligences are in degree of the nature of shadows, cast by a magic lantern on the colorless screen, Madame Blavatsky referring to Plato's example. But all things are relatively real, for the cognizer is also a reflection, and the things cognized are therefore as real to him as himself. Whatever reality things possessed must be looked for them before or after they have passed, like a flash, through the material world, says HBB. We cannot cognize any such existences directly as long as we have sense instruments, which bring only material existence into the field of our consciousness. The pictures show how easy it is to take shadows as realities. Look also at the spaces between the columns. They look like people facing each other. Whatever plane or consciousness we may acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane, for the time being, are our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the ego is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing with it the idea that now at last we have reached reality. But only when we shall have reached the absolute consciousness and blended our own with it, shall we be free from the delusions produced by Maya. Modern science is drawn more every day into the maelstrom of occultism, unconsciously, no doubt, still very sensibly. The two main theories of science, the relation between mind and matter, are monism and materialism, says the secret doctrine. Dr. Amit Goswami, Professor Emeritus of Theoretical Nuclear Physics from the University of Oregon, explains in his book, The Visionary Window, A Quantum Physicist's Guide to Enlightenment, a bit deeper what monism is. Spiritual Eastern traditions posit that transcendent consciousness rather than matter is the ground of all being, and that all else is epiphenomena or a side effect. That consciousness is both inside and outside of material space and reality. As transcendent or outside, it is pure consciousness unmanifest. Immanent or inside, it appears split as self and the world, brought forth by the mysterious force called Maya in Hindu philosophy. He describes monistic idealism as Vedanta, in accordance with the Upanishads, where it is said that only Brahman has reality, while the whole phenomenal world is the outcome or illusion of Maya, the same philosophy as the Tao in China. The proponents of monistic idealism, like Advaita Vedanta, Plato, Plotinus, Hegel, and, for example, point out that their philosophy is based on investigation, that consciousness can be known directly in its exclusive suchness because we are that. This profound truth has inspired many scientists. For example, David Bohm, Professor of Theoretical Physics from the University of London, who said in a lecture at the Mystics and Scientists Conference in 1983 that we are only scratching the surface of reality, and this will probably always be the case. We can extend our knowledge, but however far we go, there is always a limit, or the unknown beyond it. It does not look as if knowledge is going to comprehend the ultimate totality of all that is, whatever that may be. He also speculated on a different energy field in space-time implied by quantum theory that is not describable in classical physics at all. This is what he calls a simple implicate order, or a quantum formative field which determines not only the interrelationships of all the particles, but actually their formation. It would have to be described as a multidimensional order which not only acts on the three-dimensional field, but also connects and relates fields in different parts of space and has to be seen as a single whole. We would say then that the things that have appeared to us so far are merely on the surface of the whole thing. As we go deeper, we are constantly revealing new features, and that the things that first appear are superficial, merely a display of something deeper. The ultimate principle is unfoldment, which generates time, to which we will come a little bit later. The possibility of life does not arise from the superficial appearance of things, but from something much deeper. Madame Blavatsky says something similar in The Secret Doctrine. No Eastern initiate would speak of spheres above us, between the earth and the airs, even the highest, as there is no such division or measurement in occult speech. No above as no below, but an eternal within two other withins on the plane of subjectivity, merging gradually into that of terrestrial objectivity, this being for man the last one, his own plane. Professor Bohm maintains that life is organized according to an infinite hierarchy of implicate or directly connected orders. If we take the idea of space as full, that the vacuum is full of energy, then we could say this energy has evolved into various forms through various formative fields. In the poem of The Secret Doctrine, we can read as well that space is neither a limitless void or a vacuum, nor a conditioned fullness, but both. On the plane of absolute abstraction, it is the ever incognizable deity which is void only to finite minds. And on that plane of Meyeриc perception, it is the plenum or absolute container of all that is, whether manifested or unmanifested. Therefore, that absolute all. When Madame Blavatsky was questioned by her students about consciousness and what it is, she gave a very unique description, that the absolute or the attribute and secondless reality is dormant, latent mind. It is absolute consciousness eternally, which consciousness becomes relative consciousness periodically, at every manvantaric dawn or new cycle of activity. Let us picture to ourselves this latent or potential consciousness as a kind of a vacuum in a vessel, she says. Break the vessel, and what becomes of the vacuum? Where shall we look for it? It has disappeared. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is something, yet nothing. A vacuum, yet a plenum, or the absolute container of all that is, whether manifested or unmanifested. But what in reality is a vacuum, she asked? Is not absolute vacuum a figment of our fancy? A pure negation, a supposed space where nothing exists? This being so, destroy the vessel and, to our perception at any rate, nothing exists. Therefore, stanza 2 of The Secret Doctrine puts it very correctly. Universal mind was not, because there was no vehicle to contain it. In his book, A Beautiful Question, Finding Nature's Deep Design, Frank Close, Nobel Prize laureate and professor of physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, comes to a similar conclusion, that the word vacuum is commonly understood to mean empty space, devoid of matter. That all depends on how hard we are looking. But the vacuum of interstellar space is permeated by a variety of quantum energy fields. That the word vacuum does not refer unambiguously to a definite thing, and that the philosophical concept of void or space as perfect nothingness is quite different from any reasonable understanding of physical space in the present-day physical world. In modern physical cosmology, it is important to take into account that space-filling fields, such as the electromagnetic field, for example, or the newly discovered X field, have profound physical effects, altering the behavior of matter and contributing to dark energy. They are pervasive and inescapable. The behavior of matter within these different vacuums can be drastically different. It is suggestive that space itself is a sort of material that can exist in different phases, just as water can exist as liquid water, ice, or steam. If we look at evolution not only of life but of matter in general, then matter as a totality is a kind of super-intelligence that has inward depths, which emanated our bodies, and intelligence as a further development in its totality, says Professor Bohm. The same subject is addressed by the Mahatma Kutumi in letter 90, where he says, The difficulty of explaining that the fact that unintelligent forces can give rise to highly intelligent beings like ourselves is covered by the eternal progression of cycles, and the process of evolution ever perfecting its work as it goes along. It is one of the elementary and fundamental doctrines of occultism that the two are one, and are distinct but in their respective manifestations, and only in the limited perception of the world of senses. Our doctrines show that one principle in nature, spirit matter, or matter spirit, the third, the absolute, the ultimate absolute, or the quintessence of the two, losing itself beyond the view and spiritual perception of even the gods or planetary spirits. The third principle, say the Vedantic philosophers, is the only reality, everything else being Maya. Purusha and Prakriti have never been regarded in any other light than that of temporary delusions of our senses, says the Mahatma Kutumi. The word universe is a bit ambiguous, says Professor Bohm, because it literally means to turn towards the one. So the universe should really be seen as a way of looking and not seen as a thing. He introduces the term soma significant. Soma standing for body, matter or the physical, and significance means meaning. The hyphen between them indicates that they are not really different, but somehow interact. Everything is somatic or physical at its own level, which may be very subtle. And yet it has meaning for what lies beyond or inwardly. This would suggest, he says, that the universe could be regarded as the body of the universal mind. Very theosophical. The secret doctrine describes the eternity of the universe or space overall as a boundless plane, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, like a regular tidal ebb of flux and reflux. It happens according to the absolute universality of the law of periodicity, which physical science has observed as well and recorded in all departments of nature. In it we see one of the fundamental laws of the universe. Professor Amit Goswami, whom I've mentioned before, wrote in his book The Self-Aware Universe about another hypothesis, about the playground of universes or the multiverse in its interaction with an observer, comparing it with what is called superposition in science. Superposition is a principle of quantum theory that describes the challenging concept about the nature and behavior of matter and forces at the subatomic level. The principle of superposition claims that while we do not know what the state of any object in the subatomic world is, it is actually in all possible states simultaneously and potentially, as long as we don't look to check. It is a measurement itself by an observer that causes the object to be singled out and limited to a form out of all the other possibilities. Supposing that parallel universes of the many worlds theory are not material but archetypal or potential in content, and that are universes of the mind, then we can say that each observation makes a causal pathway in the fabric of possibilities, in the transcendent domain of reality. Once a choice is made, all except the one pathway which was chosen does then manifest. All the others remain as possibilities or ideas only. A truly cosmological question can now be answered, says Professor Goswami. How has the cosmos existed for the past 15 billion years when there were no conscious observers? He supposes that the universe exists as formless potentia in myriads of possible branches in the transcendent domain, and becomes manifest only when observed and manifested by conscious beings. But how does the one undivided consciousness with its possibilities becomes divided into an experiencing subject and an experienced object? Professor Goswami asked. And he quoted one of the great intriguing sentences which we have heard before from the Upanishads: "You are that, tat tvamasi." What does Theosophy teach us about the process of manifestation of multiple universes? And does it confirm Professor Amit Goswami's theory that an observer is necessary to make it possible? It does. Apart from cosmic substance, cosmic ideation could not manifest as individual consciousness, since it is only through a vehicle of matter that consciousness wells up as I, says the Mahatma Kutumi. A physical basis being necessary to focus a ray of the universal mind at a certain stage of complexity. Apart from cosmic ideation, cosmic substance would remain an empty abstraction, and no emergence of consciousness could ensue. The technical details of the whole process, are given by Madame Blavatsky in the Transactions of Blavatsky Lodge and the Secret Doctrine. Once we postulate a universal mind, both the brain, the mind's vehicle, and consciousness, its faculty, must be quite different on a higher plane from what they are here, says HPB. They are nearer to the absolute all and must therefore be represented by a substance infinitely more homogeneous, something sui generis or unique, and entirely beyond the reach of our intellectual perceptions. Let us call or imagine it as an incipient, incognizable state of primeval differentiation. On that higher plane, it seems to me, she says, that Mahat, the great Manvantaric principle of intelligence, acts as a brain, through which the universal and eternal mind radiates the Ahi, representing the resultant consciousness or ideation. The Ahi, or the Anshuans or highest intelligences, are the collective host of spiritual beings, who are the vehicle for the manifestation of the divine or universal thought and will. They are the intelligent forces that give to and enact in nature her laws, while themselves acting according to laws imposed upon them in a similar manner by still higher powers. But they are not personifications of the powers of nature, as erroneously thought, says HPB. The Secret Doctrine admits a logos, or a collective creator of the universe, a demiurgos, in the sense implied when one speaks of an architect, furnishing the plan. In our case, the plan was furnished by the ideation of the universe, and the constructive labor was left to the hosts of intelligent powers and forces. But that demiurgos is no personal deity, that is an imperfect extra-cosmic God, but only the aggregate of the Dianshuans and other forces. They are dual in their character, being composed of A, the irrational brute energy inherent in matter, and B, the intelligent soul or cosmic consciousness which directs and guides that energy, and which is a Dianshuanic thought reflecting the ideation of the universal mind. This results in a perpetual series of physical manifestation and moral effects on earth during Manvantaric periods, the whole being subservient to karma. And as the process is not always, and that process is not always perfect, and since however many proofs it may exhibit of a guidance intelligence behind the veil, it still shows gaps and flaws and even results very often in evident failures. Therefore, neither the collective host, or demiurgos, nor any of the working powers individually are proper subjects for divine honors or worship. And man ought to be ever striving to help the divine evolution of ideas by becoming to the best of his ability a co-worker with nature in that cyclic task. In June 2004, Sir Roger Penrose, Emeritus Professor of Mathematics from the University of Oxford, had a discussion at Oxford University with Dr. T.D. Singh, a scientist with a PhD in physical organic chemistry from the Irvine University in California, who is the international director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute. He is a pioneer in advancing the dialogue between science and religion. The subject of their discussion was science, spirituality, and the nature of reality. Where Professor Penrose explains that we have two different layers of reality, the small level which is quantum, and a second one where classical physics holds true. There's a fuzzy borderline between the two where we need a new physics. At the larger level, it is not the individual particles, but the entire quantum process that is in some sense cooperative over large areas of the brain, and it is non-local. We know that many things in living systems are far beyond what can be achieved in the laboratory. We are in the position of a little child, entering a huge library filled with books in many languages, he says. The child knows someone must have written these books, but it does not know how because it does not understand the languages in which they were written. It dimly suspects a mysterious order in the arrangement of the books, but does not know what it is. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of even the most intelligent human being towards the term God. We see the universe marvelously arranged and obeying certain laws, but only dimly understand them. And you quote Einstein again, who said that quantum mechanics is not the final theory because it has no room for consciousness. It has no place for it yet. There are many things in nature that we do not understand. There's something really deep, very deep, which is mysterious. The advice Roger Penrose gives us is that every person has its own strengths, whatever that may be. Believe in yourself and do not necessarily think that just because somebody is a big professor that he knows all very well what is going on in the world, and that you just have to follow his ideas. Often these ideas are fashion-driven, which should not be blindly followed. Perhaps we may never be able to understand the ultimate reality through rigorous scientific approach. Some fundamental new insights are certainly needed. Try to think for yourself. There's a lot of following other people's thinking. It is very difficult for some people to break out of their mindset, to break into something that is totally new. Are you brave enough to follow your own ideas more truly, he asked at the end of the conversation. Madame Blavatsky gives the same advice in her article, with much stronger words, in her article Nirvana Moksha, quoting from a Buddhist catechism where the question is asked, are there any dogmas in Buddhism which we are required to accept on faith? And the answer is no. Oh gosh, there is no text. Well, anyway, we are earnestly enjoined to accept nothing whatever on faith, whether it be written in books, handed down from our ancestors, or taught by the sages. Our Lord Buddha has said that we must not believe in a thing said merely because it is said, nor in traditions because they have been handed down from antiquity, nor rumors as such, nor writings by sages because sages wrote them, nor fancy that we may suspect to have been inspired in us by a deva, that is in presumed spiritual inspiration, nor from inferences drawn from some haphazard assumption we may have made, nor because of what seems an analogical necessity, nor on the mere authority of our teachers and masters. But we are to believe when the writing, doctrine, or saying is corroborated by our own reason and consciousness. For this, says he in concluding, I taught you not to believe merely because you have heard, but when you believed of your consciousness, then act accordingly and abundantly. And in letter 120 we can read, thus it is plain that the methods of occultism, though in the main unchangeable, have yet to conform to altered times and circumstances, and that the state of the general society in England is unlike that of India, and requires quite a different policy in the presentation of occult sciences. Dr. Deepak Chopra, a pioneer of integrative medicine, which combines conventional Western medicine with complementary and alternative therapies, and Dr. Menas Kafatos, professor of physics, computational science and engineering at Chapman University in California, wrote in their book, You Are the Universe, Discovering Your Cosmic Self and Why It Matters, that reality is all-inclusive and that human beings can embrace an infinite variety of what reality has to offer. Everything we perceive is a mental creation, accumulated over millions of years of evolution. Human beings might be a bright idea the universe had. But why? This can only mean one thing. We allowed the universe to be aware of itself in the dimension of time and space. Quantum physics makes it undeniable that we live in a participatory universe. Our minds are fused with the cosmic mind. The reason why it took so long to arrive at this conclusion is that stubborn materialism. The brain just serves as a doorway to where consciousness lives. Photons strike our retina as we read information, which gets transformed into faint electrical impulses in the brain. Anything a person can say, think, or do can be computerized in the form of a digital code, using ones and zeros. Unless the universe is mindful, it is impossible to create a mind out of a mindless creation. Neurons, for example, do not listen to music. We do. Even the most basic elements of consciousness are absent from the brain. It has no idea that it exists. It does not decide what music we would like to listen to on the radio. Our mind does. Consciousness is not in the universe any more than wetness is in the water. Consciousness is already there. Wetness and water coexist. They are inseparable from each other. The secret doctrine says something similar, namely that concrete consciousness cannot be predicted of abstract consciousness any more than the quality wet can be predicted of water. Wetness being its own attribute, and the cause of the wet quality in other things. Consciousness implies limitation and qualifications, something to be conscious of and someone to be conscious of it. But absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, the thing cognized, and the cognition, all three in itself, and all three are one. Which parts of our own reality can we change, using only our mind, that actually make a difference, asked Dr. Chapra and Professor Kafatos. This needs to be defined by a term which the average person has probably never heard, qualia, a Latin word which means qualities. It points away from physical objects towards subjective experiences. Qualia are the everyday qualities of existence: light, sound, color, shape, texture. They are the glue that holds the five senses together, like the scent of a rose, the velvety texture of its petals and shape, for example. Qualia is everywhere. Nothing happens without them. They are the subjective building blocks of reality. The body is not experienced as cells, tissues, or organs, but rather in different states of awareness. Mind comes first and reaches out to experience reality through qualia, embracing the five senses. The universe is in us, and since qualia occur in consciousness, they are not limited to physical dimensions. The brain produces images in such a way that it is not inside its tissues. No matter how hard we look, we will not find any image in the brain. It just serves one function. It gives access to the mental space where all concepts, experiences, memories, images, and all qualia reside. Like an image on the television screen, for example. They are a play and interplay of electrons. They don't tell us anything about the meaning of the story we see. Only the mind enables consciousness to perceive the meaning. The mind may pause and marvel at how convincing the state of separation can be. The universe is one undivided whole. Its parts, like atoms, galaxies, forces, etc., are qualia or qualities of consciousness. The same place to see the image of a rose in our mind's eyes where nature goes as well when it creates an actual rose. We participate in the same consciousness that is the universe. A ripe sweet peach, for example, floods the senses with experience and not with numbers or equations. Qualia perfectly matches reality. Experience does not need conceptual frameworks, but is a seed for a new view of nature, transforming the physical universe into a consciousness-based one. Qualia is perceived as insight, intuition, imagination, inspiration, and creativity. The organs of perception do not create perception, but are the lens through which consciousness and its qualia create perceptual experience. Feelings like pain, hunger, and emotions cause the body to evolve a symbolical representation, a feedback loop that originates in consciousness, not in the biology of the brain. Consciousness is a field of possibilities and it is prior to experience. The source of manifestation is beyond time, space, matter, and energy. Human consciousness looking at itself is a mirror of a field of consciousness looking at itself. Evolution is purpose-driven through each species as it experiments with its environment and gets feedback. Humans have the gift of self-awareness, coming to terms with its true nature. Self-awareness will be the starting point for the next leap in our creative evolution, say Dr. Chopra and Professor Kafatos, motivated by human aspiration, taking our civilization into the direction of wholeness, healing, and enlightenment. During the last couple of months, we also investigated the illusion of time and the mystery of life at Blavatsky Lodge in 2 lectures under the title Eternal Duration and Moments in Time, and From Darkness to Light and From Light to Life. Starting with time, which seems to be moving on in a very precise order of seconds, minutes, and hours, and around which our life is organized. We take it for granted, but its mystery has challenged philosophers and scientists alike. Both agree that it is a deception of our senses. And starting with a quote from a secret doctrine which Colin has already used yesterday, time is only an illusion produced by the succession of our states of consciousness as we travel through eternal duration, says the secret doctrine. And it does not exist where no consciousness exists in which the illusion can be produced, but lies asleep. The present is only a hypothetical mathematical line which divides that part of eternal duration which we call the future from that part which we call the past. Nothing on earth has real duration, for nothing remains without change, or the same for a billionth part of a second. The real person or thing does not consist solely of what is seen at any particular moment, but is composed of the sum of all its various and changing conditions, from its appearance in the material form to its disappearance from the earth. No one could say that a bar of metal dropped into the sea came into existence as it left the air, and ceased to exist as it entered the water, and that the bar itself consists only of that cross-section that separates, and at the same time joins the atmosphere and the ocean. Even so of persons and things which, dropping out of the to-be into the has-been, out of the future into the past, present momentarily to our senses a cross-section, as it were, of their total selves, as they pass through time and space as matter, on their way from one eternity to another. And these constitute that duration in which alone anything has true existence, where our sense is but able to cognize it there. Though the whole cosmos is a gigantic chronometer in one sense, says the Mahatma Kutumi, man is the only animal that takes any cognizance of time, although it makes him neither happier nor wiser. Finite similes are unfit to express the abstract and the finite, nor can the objective ever mirror the subjective. And in letter 20, the Mahatma Kutumi strongly emphasizes that the occult science is not one in which secrets can be communicated of a sudden by a written or even verbal communication. If so, all the brothers would have to do would be to publish a handbook of the art, which might be taught in schools at grammars. The illumination must come from within. No hocus pocus of metaphysical lectures or discussions, no self-imposed penance can give it, he says. All these are but means to an end. And this was and has been no secret for thousands of years. Fasting, meditation, chastity of thought, word and deed, silence for certain periods of time to enable nature herself to speak to him who comes to her for information, government of the animal passions and impulses, utter unselfishness of intention have been published as a means since the day of Plato and Iamblichus in the West, and since the far earlier times of the Indian rishis. This always reminds me of a passage in the Voice of the Silence where it says, "Be humble if thou wouldst attain wisdom. Be humbler still when wisdom thou hast mastered." In an article for the New York Times called "The Time We Thought We Knew," Brian Greene, an American theoretical physicist, mathematician and string theorist, professor at Columbia University in New York, wrote that time dominates experience. But what is time? He asked. Certainly a few years in the 21st century, science must have figured out why time seems to flow, while it always goes in one direction and why we are uniformly drawn from one second to the next. But the fact is that the explanation for these basic features of time remain controversial. The more physicists have searched for definitive answers, the more our everyday conception of time appears illusory. But at the early part of the 20th century, Albert Einstein showed that the wristwatches worn by two individuals moving relative to one another or experience different gravitational fields tick off time at different rates. Numerous terrestrial experiments and astronomical observations leave no doubt that Einstein was right, says Professor Green, because the flexibility of time's passage becomes readily apparent only at high speeds, near the maximum speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second, or in strong gravitational fields near black holes. It remains still a great challenge even for physicists to internalize Einstein's breakthrough from about 100 years ago. Most of us imagine that reality consists of everything that exists right now, that everything would be found like a hypothetical freeze-frame image of the universe at this moment, that the history of reality could thus be depicted by stacking one such freeze-frame image on top of the one that had come before, creating a cosmic version of an old-time flipbook, a remnant of Newton's absolute thinking. But clocks that are in relative motion or that are subject to different gravitational fields tick off time at different rates. Individuals carrying such clocks will not therefore agree on what happens when on the different pages of the cosmic flipbook, even though it provides an equally valid compendium of history. Under these rules, what constitutes a moment in time is completely subjective. Sitting next to each other, our freeze-frame image of the present would be identical. But as soon as one of us were to start walking, the mathematics of relativity show that the subsequent pages of the flipbook would have happened at different times, some earlier, some later. This realization shatters our comfortable sense that the past is gone, the future is yet to be, and the present it was truly exists. This is also what the Mahatma Kutumi says in letter 15. I feel even irritated at having to use these three clumsy words, past, present, and future, miserable concepts of the objective phases of the subjective whole. They are about as ill adapted for the purpose as an axe for fine carving. Most physicists cope with this disparity, writes Professor Green, that there is time understood scientifically and that there is time as experienced intuitively. The choice of whether to finally be seduced by the phase nature reveals directly to our senses, or to recognize the reality that exists beyond perception is ours. And what about life? In the physical sciences, like biology, life proper starts with a self-maintaining system. Yet Theosophy teaches us that whatever quits the laya or homogeneous latent state becomes active conscious life. But what properties must a system have to be called truly living? Can a clear distinction be made between motion and a living system? What is a precise connection between self-organization and life? These challenging questions were studied and addressed by the two Chilean scientists, Dr. Umberto Maturana and Dr. Francisco Varela. They coined a new word for what defines the living or vital system, autopoiesis, a combination of the two Greek terms auto, which means self, referring to the autonomy of a self-organizing system, and poiesis, sharing the same Greek root as the word poetry, which means making. Autopoiesis therefore means self-making, a peculiar closure of living systems which are alive and maintain themselves metabolically, whether they succeed in reproduction or not. Unlike machines, whose governing functions are embedded by human designers, organisms, on the other hand, are self-governing. Autopoiesis emphasizes life's maintenance of its own identity. The key characteristic of a living network is that it continually produces itself, a distinct system while being an active part of the network. Through the interaction with the environment, living organisms continually maintain and renew themselves, using energy and resources from the environment for that purpose. The continual self-making includes the ability to form new structures and new patterns of behavior. According to autopoiesis, the mind is not a thing but a process, that the organizing activity of living organisms is mental activity and interaction. Mental processes are immanent in matter at all levels. Learning, memory, decision-making, etc. are mental processes, a necessary and inevitable consequence before organisms develop brains and higher nervous systems. Madame Blavatsky confirms in the Secret Doctrine commentaries that on this, our very same plane, there are not only the intellects of men, there are other intellects and intelligences, call them what you like. The minds of animals, from the highest to the lowest, from the elephant down to the ant. I can assure you that the ant has in relation to its own plane just as good an intellect as we have. If it cannot express it to us in words, it yet shows reasoning powers besides and above instinct, as we all know. To say that animals have no intelligence is the greatest fallacy in the world. Dr. Maturana and Dr. Varela's concept of what the nature of life and cognition is was later on called the Santiago theory. According to this theory, the brain is not necessary to exist. A bacterium or a plant has no brain but has a mind. Mind and matter no longer appear as two separate categories, but are seen as merely different aspects or dimensions of the same phenomenon of life. 2 more minutes, then I'm finished. It is a continual bringing forth of a world through the process of living, that the process of living itself is a process of cognition, including perception, emotion, and behavior, which does not necessarily require a brain and nervous system, that even bacteria perceive certain characteristics of their environment. Development is always associated with learning, the two sides of the same coin. Cognition is not a representation of an independent world, but rather bringing forth of a world where no objectively existing structures exist independently, but are part of each other in a network of interdependence. As the complexity of a living organism increases, so does the cognitive domain. The brain and nervous system represent a significant expansion of an organism's cognitive domain. At a certain level of complexity, a living organism not only couples to its environment, but also to itself, and thus brings forth not only an external but also an inner world. In human beings, this process of an inner world is intimately linked to language, thought, and consciousness. And this is what the Secret Doctrine confirms. Everything in the universe is a process. In the process, progresses steadily in the great cycle, while incessantly going up and down the smaller cycles. Nature is never stationary during Manvantara. It is ever becoming, not simply being. And mineral, vegetable, and human life are always adapting their organisms to the then reigning elements. And therefore those elements were then fitted for them, as they are now for the life of present humanity. I would like to close now with a short paragraph from this Aramaic original text which I found some decades ago. The Essene Gospel of Peace, Book 4, the Teachings of the Elect. For the brotherhood of the Essenes, the Heavenly Father was law, governing everything in the manifested universe. The earthly mother was nature in its constant adaptation for bringing forth suitable vehicles for the manifestation of life in their countless forms. Just what we have heard. Jesus emphasized that the communication with the vital forces of sound, light, and life are absolutely essential for evolutionary progress, and he said, "When the sun is high in the heavens, then shall you seek the holy stream of sound, for it can only be heard in the silence. It was his sound which formed the earth and the world, and you shall bathe in the stream of sound. For in the beginning of times did we share in the holy stream of sound that gave birth to all creation. Become the sound itself, that the stream of sound may carry you to the endless kingdom of the Heavenly Father, there where the rhythm of the world rises and falls. Let your thoughts before sleep be with the stars. For the stars are light and the Heavenly Father is light. For at the beginning of time the Holy Law said, let there be light. And there was light, and you shall be one with it. One day your body will return to the earthly mother. But the holy stream of life, the holy stream of sound, and the holy stream of light were never born and can never die. Enter the holy streams that you may reach the kingdom of the Heavenly Father and become one with Him. More than this cannot be told, for the holy streams will take you to that place where words are no more, and even the holy scrolls cannot record the mysteries therein. And then the elder was quiet, and a great stillness stole over the brothers, and no one wished to speak. The shadows of late afternoon played on the river still and silvery as glass, and in the darkening sky could faintly be seen the filigree crescent moon of peace, and the great peace of the Heavenly Father wrapped them all in deathless love. Peace be with you.